What chickens eat influences their health, happiness, and the nutritional quality of the eggs that they lay. And people nutrition is no different. While we might not lay eggs, what we eat is super important to the quality of the lives that we can live. Today, I want to dive into some human-related nutritional topics, like what's the deal with seed oil and why am I hearing so much about ultra-processed food right now? I recently did a video explaining why I do all this stuff, having so many chickens, putting effort into growing my own food in the garden. And what it really boiled down to is I am seeking nutrient-dense, high-quality food, which is becoming harder and harder to find in terms of buying it and also to afford to buy the food when you can find it in the first place. And that was also sort of the theme of the video I did about why chickens in your own backyard can lay eggs that are so much better than the eggs that you can buy at the grocery store because they are so much more nutrient-dense. Having access to nutrient-dense foods really matters to me. So that's why I decided today to talk about some of the hot button topics that you may have seen circulating around on the internet. The term ultra-processed food has been bandied about on the internet lately, and I'm a little kind of confused about where this term has even come from. We used to refer to the kinds of food that ultra-processed food is now labeling as processed food or refined foods. And I'm really confused why we needed an extra label for this, because it's like people seem surprised that it's come out that this kind of food is bad for us. That should be pretty clear that a package of what is essentially just chemicals and refined food ingredients is probably not that good for you. First of all, we're not going to give this stuff, this ultra-processed food, the dignity of being called food. It's not food. It's deceptively designed packages of chemicals and calories targeted to co-opt our innate wisdom in choosing foods that actually meet our needs. I guess there's been a lot of research actually coming out lately about just how bad this stuff is for us. But do we really need research to tell us that water is wet? We know this stuff isn't good for us. We might not be able to stop eating it because it has been targeted to really addict us into eating it, to hit our brains to make us keep eating it. But we know it's not good for us. The only point I can see of research like this is to give policy makers some backing, because they have been so neutered by corporate interests that they need some science to actually give them a spine. Let's have a quick look about what ultra-processed actually means, why it's a pretty meaningless term, and why it ultimately doesn't even matter. Now, there is a scale that I've seen. It's called the NOVA scale, and it categorizes foods from 1 to 4. And if you want to look that up in detail, you can jump on Google and have a look. But basically, from my perspective, it goes like this. Level 1 is food, level 2 is food, level 3 is food, and level 4 is not food. Level 4 is their level for ultra-processed. And basically, ultra-processed is not food. And that is things like a bag of Doritos or a plastic packaged loaf of bread at the grocery store that's going to stay fresh for like 7 days. That, in my opinion, is not food. It is ultra-processed, and it just doesn't get to be called food. So that is why I'm saying the term ultra-processed really is meaningless. It doesn't help anybody make better choices about the food they're choosing to eat. A much better way to think about food is from the perspective of nutrient density and calorie density. So you can have foods that are nutrient dense but not calorie dense. You can have foods that are nutrient dense and calorie dense, and these are all great foods. And you can have foods that are calorie dense but nutrient poor. So foods like that don't have a lot of nutrients in them but are high in calories are things like refined sugar, refined grains like white flour and white rice. Foods like that can pack a huge calorie punch in your diet. You can eat a lot of it without sort of noticing, but they're not bringing the nutrient density along with them. And the easy way around that is to eat less of the highly refined foods, and when you're eating them, to make sure you're consuming them in meals that have got lots of nutrient density within them. So that is doing things like having your white rice for a dinner meal, but making sure that it is going along with lots of vegetables and some high quality meat from pastured sources, things like that. So you're bringing along the low nutrient density with high nutrient density and creating balanced meals that meet your needs. I'm not saying that people have to completely cut out all those refined foods, because that's A, pretty impossible, and B, it's quite a hard sell to switch to 100% whole grain bread. It doesn't necessarily taste that good to us with our palates that have been developed with a less whole grain based diet. And it can be pretty tricky to get a bread consistency from 100% whole grain that actually meets the needs that we're wanting to use that bread for. Eating a 100% whole grain sandwich isn't necessarily a delicious eating experience, but we can combine both refined flours and whole grain flours into the same loaf to give us a much higher nutrient density food without sacrificing the things that we're looking for, the soft fluffiness of the bread. Ultra-processed stuff is designed around manipulating our bodies and our brains into thinking that it is something that's actually okay to eat. They're usually packed full of salt, sugar, and flavor-enhancing substances to trick us into thinking that it is food. And those things also help to disguise the fact that a lot of the ingredients going into that food is very low quality and potentially rancid and not really fit for consumption. But if they load in enough salt, fat, sugar, and flavor enhancements, then we're not going to be able to pick up that the base ingredients are really not good, and we would never put them in our mouths if we had them in their natural, unadulterated state. Another reason that ultra-processed stuff has been so heavily brought into our marketplace, into our lives, is because it's a great way for corporations to use up those low-quality ingredients that can last a long time. Well, they can't last a long time. That's why they have to put all of that stuff over the top so we don't notice that they're not really good for eating anymore. And because they can make shelf-stable products that can last for a really, really long time. When you're dealing with fresh foods, you've got a very short turnaround to get that food to the market, to the consumers, and you potentially are going to have some wastage if you're not going to preserve that food in a more wholesome way. You're going to just have to waste the food. And this ultra-processed stuff can stay on the shelf for years in some cases, but certainly much longer than things you can make in your own kitchen will last for. Now, there's a pretty famous line from a pretty famous prayer that says, "Give us today our daily bread." Because here's the thing, bread freshly baked in your own kitchen only stays fresh for 24 hours. But if I go and buy bread from the grocery store, that bread will stay fresh for up to a week or 10 days. And that is fairly terrifying when you think about it. So what does all this mean for you? Well, try to make your diet, the food that you're eating, 80% actual food. And don't sweat the small stuff. If you're going to chuck a frozen pizza in the oven a couple of times a month, it's really not a big deal. Human bodies are incredibly resilient. It's really about what you do the majority of the time and not what you do occasionally. If, however, you're relying on prepackaged food multiple times a week, you might want to have a closer look at how you could make some changes. We're going to take a little sidebar now to talk about some of the issues with nutritional science and how that feeds through to policy decisions. But before we dive into this, I'm going to have to read you a disclaimer so that I don't get in trouble with the authorities. None of the information presented here is intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. Right, let's get back into what are some of the issues with why nutritional science is not really always fit for purpose to roll out as general population advice. The thing about looking at science when you're talking about nutrition, because that feeds into biology. So when we're looking at biological sciences, well, biology is really, really complex. And science likes to do little chunks of information. So they can only really look at one thing at a time, one factor at a time. But biological systems are extremely complex. So it takes a very long time and a lot of nutritional research, many studies to start to build a general picture of something, because you can't necessarily use the information from one study with one population looking at one thing and make wide generalizations. I'm going to use cholesterol as an example to illustrate this point. So in the 80s and the 90s, cholesterol was demonized. We were told, make sure you don't eat foods high in cholesterol, reduce how many eggs you eat in a week. Cholesterol is absolutely terrible and it is going to absolutely cause heart disease if you have high levels of cholesterol. And we really jumped the gun on that because as more research has been done, we are discovering that the cholesterol picture is much more complicated than just cholesterol equals bad. I like to think of it as firefighters fighting a fire. So stay with me here. Now in this analogy, we have a fire and we have firefighters. The fire is heart disease or general circulatory system malfunction, and cholesterol are the firefighters. So if you have a fire and firefighters show up, the firefighters being cholesterol, you wouldn't say that the firefighters had lit the fire. But that's sort of the mistake or the jump to conclusion that was made from the initial scientific research into cholesterol and heart disease. It has now become more apparent that fire hazards are the actual cause of the fires. And in this analogy, fire hazards are things like chronic inflammation and metabolic dysfunction. Now, the firefighters, the cholesterol, are not causing the fires. They're trying to put the fires out the best way they know how, and reducing or removing the firefighters by using cholesterol-lowering drugs without a full picture of what that's doing in the body is not going to put out those fires. I don't think we've reached a clear picture of the role that cholesterol plays in the human body yet from the research that has been done. We are getting closer, but we don't have full and final answers to be making some of the statements that are being made. It is unclear if cholesterol-lowering drugs benefit huge diverse populations. It can only be said with certainty that lowering cholesterol, if cholesterol is high, is beneficial in middle-aged white men who have already had a cardiac incident. That's the only clear benefit that we have from cholesterol-lowering medication. So that's not to say that there isn't a benefit, but the benefits for women and different populations, older populations, younger populations, are not settled yet, and more research needs to be done. Cholesterol is super important to have in the body, and we actually make it ourselves. So when we eat a lot of cholesterol in our diets, our body makes a bit less cholesterol, and if we don't eat a lot of cholesterol in our diets, our body makes more of it. It seems to be really important for the human body to have a set level of cholesterol, which is probably an individual sort of a number. Cholesterol is super important for our ability to synthesize vitamin D from sunlight. If we don't have enough of the good cholesterol that we need, we are not able to make vitamin D at the levels that we require. It's also present in every single cell membrane in our body and is absolutely important for the integrity of our cell structures. And it forms the precursor to all the steroidal hormones that our bodies makes. That is cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. They're pretty important hormones, and cholesterol is absolutely essential in our body's ability to make them. Let's get this video back on track and talk about seed oils. Now, I'm seeing a lot of controversy about seed oils on the internet at the moment. And really, the issue with seed oils boils down to two factors. The first factor is that a lot of seed oils are industrially processed into something that, in my opinion, becomes not a food. And that is basically all the cheap oils, cooking oils that you find at the grocery store that are in clear plastic bottles, and they're sort of a bland, vaguely golden color. But basically, if it's packaged in a plastic clear bottle, it's probably not a food anymore. And the other issue with seed oils is that they are a polyunsaturated fat, and there is concern about the ratio between omega-3 and omega-6 essential fatty acids, with seed oils often being quite high in omega-6 and relatively low in omega-3. If your concern about seed oils is seeing them in the ingredients lists on ultra-processed food, then I wouldn't worry too much about it, because that's not food in the first place. And the fact that it already has a not food oil in it, and its not food capacity, it's sort of missing the forest for the trees when the forest has a Twinkie factory in it. So don't worry about that. If they want to use super processed seed oils in their super processed foodstuffs, then that's on them. We don't want to be eating that stuff anyway. If your concern about seed oils is that they are not a great oil to use for cooking because polyunsaturated fats can be quite unstable at high heats, then that is a more relevant concern. Now, I wouldn't recommend using those super processed industrialized oils in the first place. But if you're using a cold pressed seed oil, so here is an oil that I do use, and it is a cold pressed extra virgin sunflower oil. This is a food. It is just squeezed sunflower seeds, and it makes a perfectly nutritious oil. Now, it is a highly polyunsaturated oil, and it does have a high omega-6 to 3 ratio. When used in the context of a diet that is predominantly made from foods and not foods, it is perfectly nutritious and healthy and good for you. When you're eating a diet that is packed full of good whole foods, you don't need to worry quite so much about your omega-6 and 3 ratios. They have a tendency of just sort of working themselves out. And if you're concerned about using polyunsaturated fats as high heat cooking, well, don't use them for that. Use them for lower heat, use them for salads, things like that. The sort of applications that you would use a really good quality olive oil for, use them in that context. And for safe cooking oils, use your saturated fats because they are extremely stable under high heat. So things like tallow and lard and clarified butter and coconut oil are all exceptionally stable, healthy fats for use in high heat cooking. Somewhat related to the seed oil debate is the fact that not all foods that are called the same are actually the same when you're trying to make decisions at the grocery store. It is true that a lot of companies are trying to trick you into picking a food that's not actually a food. And an example of that is peanut butter. So here is the peanut butter that I buy and eat here, and it's unfortunately only available in New Zealand at the moment, but it is peanut butter. It has peanuts and salt. Those are the ingredients. 2 ingredients, peanut and salt. It's a food that's made up of foods, and it is a food, and that's perfectly healthy and great to eat. But it's on the shelf with a bunch of other things, also called peanut butter, that have more ingredients than that. They have peanuts, they have salt, they have sugar, they have industrialized seed oils put in to make them oilier and to account for the fact that the peanuts used were not very good quality. They have stabilizers and emulsifiers and preservatives, so they're starting to get into the category of not food. But they're all sitting there on the shelf together, all called peanut butter. And that's when you have to start actually paying attention. But if you're at the point that you're actually starting to pay attention to these things, you're well on your way to eating a much healthier diet in the first place. Our culture has a broken relationship with food, and I hope to do a video on that topic soon. Relearning how to eat, how to retrain our palates so that we crave nutrient-dense whole foods, learning how to cook from scratch, and trying to find the time to learn and do all of these things, and where to even get that food in the first place is really hard. But every small step you make in the right direction is going to put you on a pathway towards a healthier future. There's no need to get overwhelmed by all the conflicting information out there in this food, nutrition, diet space. Eat 80% of your food from actual food and stay active, and you'll be well on your way.